It's 1:38 p.m. This year is 10 years after, is the 20th anniversary after September 11th, 2001. Among the many things that happened as a result of 9/11 was a revision to concepts of insurance for terrorist attacks. There was a comprehensive legislative paradigm that got put into effect regarding terrorism risk insurance. It was originally called the Terrorism Risk Insurance Program. Now, TRIP has had an evolution in many different forms over the last 20 years, including in connection with a nuclear paradigm. Telemedication was originally discussed as part of a nuclear paradigm. There's primary source information concerning these early discussions regarding telemedication as a form of nuclear medicine that occurred at a conference in Puerto Rico concerning the nuclear energy sector and peaceful uses of atomic energy for South American and Central American countries. This was from the 1950s. And one of the very prominent manners in which concepts of peaceful nuclear energy were discussed had to do with telemedication, which at that time was in its nascent stages. Now, they don't tell us a lot about what they mean when they talk about telemedication services these days. And they certainly do not disclose to us that telemedication started specifically as an understanding of a peaceful use of atomic energy. It is a nuclear paradigm. There's no two ways around it. And refusing to disclose that and refusing to prepare us appropriately is nuclear sabotage, no matter how you look at it. Would such nuclear sabotage presumably be included under considerations of terrorism? Would somebody need to try to guard themselves against liability in accordance with somebody out risk leveraging their capacities to engage in unsafe practices concerning a nuclear paradigm? Let me ask you something. Where and when did the original considerations of terrorism risk insurance prioritize political risk insurance? As far as I know, the original terrorism risk insurance program did no such thing. But if you look at what is set up for this year's appropriations, then one sees that appropriations regarding administration of justice do just that. Now, there's a case by former, now departed Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. And in this case, in his opinion, his formal opinion, he discusses the appropriations and the proportion of appropriations that are given to and by the government for the Office of Special Counsel versus the other areas under the administration of justice. My understanding would be in budgetary priorities concerning administration of justice that what he discusses in this case would be relevant. Talking about in the time frame he was discussing this, which was the early 90s, the percentages of the Department of Justice's resources that were about investigations of potential government malfeasance. Right now, what we are teared to does not allow for an easy find, and that's exactly why I didn't look this up before I got on camera. Whatever your priorities are not about attempting to reconfigure the, as Gunny Highway would say, clusterfuck I just saw last night in a manner that would appropriately comport with what our needs are. What this tells me is that, again, we're in a situation where individuals are attempting to lean on us after committing serious tax fraud to cover their political risk insurance. And that is what provides the disproportionate misrepresentation of the deficits that one finds in the evaluation of the budgetary appropriations concerning administration of justice. You're using the FBI and the Department of Justice in order to calibrate schemes aimed at covering up for very high-level organized crime, including organized crime involved in acts of public corruption that themselves constitute acts of terrorism. And you're trying to leverage that, or rather offset the risk penalty that would be accrued by the people that need the insurance by undermining and privatizing the terrorist risk insurance program in manners that have instead attempted to recapitulate crime as risk. Now, in addition to these various cases that were evidenced by opinions authored by Justice Scalia, I presented a public comment to the Federal Reserve, specifically referencing this point. In the autumn of 2019, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid were in the process of creating a paradigm that was going to allow for private healthcare providers to start recording risk as revenue. I was very alarmed by this because it also correlated with strategic changes that were happening with the Housing and Urban Development Agency, associated, I understood, with changes to the Federal Housing Agency that had been neglected or had been obstructed for several years. And what it did is it let there be the development of a 1 to 3 year period where people who were insiders and had been able to get some sort of special dispensation could capitalize off of an intentionally orchestrated market volatility. But what was the buy-in? Well, part of the buy-in was an agreement to keep your mouth shut about the complicity with other crimes that were happening at another level, including crimes that were happening at a level that would otherwise be characterized as your political opposition, i.e., you're a good little green energy bunny that wants the good fresh food and wants to help the poor people, but you got to keep quiet about the intentionally orchestrated and set up defaults involving loans to the gas and oil sector during the time frame when they're leveraging catastrophe in order to get federal assistance to pay for their executives and dump their toxic assets. Around the same time, you have that 1 to 2 year period where you can buy cheap HUD and flip it so that by the time the catastrophe's over, you're already in. Haves and have-nots. This is exactly what they've been setting up for the last several years. This is exactly what I saw. What you need to do is you need to get actual law people into the legal agencies. Get your financiers and your little brokers out of the Department of Justice. Get your hedge fund managers out of the fucking FBI. Get your executive compensation accounts out of fucking law enforcement. Period. We've had way too much money blown on kickback schemes involving law enforcement that's able to be bought off in order to cover up for crime at high levels. You've wasted the Department of Justice and you've wasted the Federal Bureau of Investigation for going on 20 years, it seems. There was an article in the New Yorker that was published in beginning of 2017. What it discussed was responses that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had immediately after September 11th, specifically concerning the Pakistani American community in New York City. If you can find it, I would advise you to read it. If you've kept your job with the Federal Bureau of Investigation or the Department of Justice since then, you may need to reconsider options available to you, because you've done a horrible disservice to your country. It seems like all you did was agree to be unlicensed brokers in violation of the 13th Amendment. It will not stand. And that is the first and primary area for recapitulation when it comes to dealing with this country's future. If you don't take the initiative yourself, somebody else will. And I'm not going to let you get carbon offset credits because you agreed to traffic your daughters for the Department of Energy.